Hello everyone, welcome to Docker in Practice. This is my fourth video in regard to Docker. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about rate limiting. Rate limiting is a feature in NginX Web Server. It is used to prevent DDOS attacks or prevent our web server or web application from being overloaded by so many requests, too many requests at the same time. For example, imagine you have a login API and then you need to restrict, for example, some scripts that want to hack your server. So this is a very good feature in the NginX Web Server, which is used to restrict some APIs, some IPs to overload requests to our server. So let's go to the demo for now. This is our fourth video, as I said, and then I did some restructuring of the project. So from now on, I will be adding more services to our Docker Compose. And then the restructuring is that every service or every app that we create, it will go under the apps directory. And nothing new will be added here. In the main directory, we have apps. Any configuration goes under configs. Logs is just arbitrary, so it will be ignored. And I added a file called .docker-ignore. It's a thing that you want to ignore anything that goes into the Docker images. So it's a good feature to limit, kind of reduce the size of the Docker images. And Docker-ignore, you can ignore anything. In the git-ignore, you can ignore anything for the Git repository. So I added logs directly in both of them because we don't need it for our Git and Docker. And in the root directory, we have Docker Compose, which has a list of all of our services. For each service, we have a Docker file. Main.py file is the main file for our whole application. And it's mostly used for the configuration, for example, for setting up the routes or the templates, and just very simple file, and the rest goes under apps directory. And we have NginX Web Server, and this is its Docker file. The README requirement, anything that needed for our application, and settings.py. Any settings that you need to add for your service or for application goes under settings.py. So this is a neat the structuring of your app. You can go with whatever way you want, but this is the thing that I usually go with, and it's neat, easy to read, and it's very straightforward. In the apps directory, so I have a service called auth. Auth is authentication service. It's used for us to authenticate user, or it can be used for sign up as well. And later, when we add tokenization method for authentication, everything that is related for user authentication will go under this service. Inside this service, we have views, which is used for in Python for responding to user requests. The routes list of all routes and URLs that we have for our service, and anything related to the APIs will go under API directory. In the API, same as the top level directory, we have routes and we have the views. So you can read these files yourself, but the structure will be same for every service that we have. So under each service, we have API folder and we have templates if we need. And also we have routes directory, routes file. And then let's jump into Docker Compose file, which is the main file that we need. We have two services so far. Web server, which is our web server, NginX server. We have NginX config here, and NginX Docker file here, and NginX config. We have defined on the config directory. And we renamed the previous name of the service to auth service. This is the service for authentication. any future services will be added with a different name. And then we mentioned that we want all of our services to be behind the web server, so we don't expose ports for each service. So I commented these things, so our outside users will not have access to the ports of the services. Let's take a look at the NginX config. Here the interesting part. Here is the interesting part. So this is my NginX config. I have defined some configuration, and for the location directory, for the root directory, everything will goes to the alt service for now under port 8000. And then I have separated main service from the APIs. For the login API, for now specifically, I have defined the location for the app login, but later on I will change it to auth because it's a generic thing. But for now, for the login API, I have defined some configurations here. But the very main thing is that proxy path. The proxy path goes to the auth service upstream. I have defined the auth service upstream, which will point to the or auth service at port 8000, which I have set here. This is the name of the host, and the port that service is running is 8000. But here is the rate limit thing. In order to define a rate limit, you can use a limit rec zone. So it has some configuration. The first one is the binary IP address of the remote client that is making requests to our service. This is a binary remote address. The zone is anything that you want. The name of the zone, you can have different names for zone. And after name of the zone, so I have defined a login zone, and it has take 10 megabyte space for the different IPs that make requests. And then this is the rate. So what I mentioned is that for now, in sake of the demonstration, I have said that only each IP can only make 5 requests per minute. So if IP makes more than 5 requests in 1 minute, the request will be blocked, and the request will not be reached to the backend service, which is auth service. So I will show you how it will work. So this is our configuration, and we have changed this to 2 to show that how that works, but it can be easily changed in the future. And then under my location directive, I have mentioned that the limit rate, and I have specified a zone. So for this directive, the rate limiting of my endpoint will go under zone of logging, and this will be used for managing the request load. I'm gonna bring up both services. So if you don't provide any name after Docker Compose -d, it will bring up all the services. It's creating a new Docker network for us. But you can fix this. There is another feature in Docker Compose which is depends on. You can list all the services that each service depends on. For example, in this case, the auth service depends on web server service. So whenever auth service comes up, it will automatically bring up the web server as well. But now both the servers are up. Let me see if they are running. The web server is not running. Let's debug it very quick. See what's going on. Seems it's up now. Not sure what was the issue. So my port 80 is already under use. I'm not sure which service is using, so I mapped the port 80 of NginX to port 81 in my local host. So I go to port 81 and I see that my login homepage is running now. So quickly I will log the logs. I will show all the logs that goes into the my auth service. But beside that, I want to show all the logs of the web server. So we will see that what happens when a request is blocked. All the error logs. I believe that it goes under error logs. So this is the logs of my web server, NginX Web Server. And this is the logs of my authentication service. So now I'm going to make a few login requests. I hit the login button. I type my username and password. I make a send request. So because by default it throws 401, which is the authentication is failed. This is in the code I have set up in the code. So if you want to see why it's returning that, here I mentioned that return unauthorized status code, failed to return application code, failed to authenticate user. So the first request went through successfully. As we see here, we got a request from a client. And in the access, in the NginX access log, we see that request came. So the request came to this endpoint, and the response was 401. And that was the response. This was the request, came from the client, localhost. The first one went through successfully. Now, when I make the second request will go as well, because that's in the configuration we set only 2 requests per minute. The second one is also successful. Successfully went through the auth service, as we see here. The second one came. Now I will hit I will try to log in one more time, but now you see that it got another response, which is server overloaded and service temporarily unavailable, which means that NginX automatically blocked this request from this IP, and we see that no other request came to our auth service. And if we go to NginX error log, we see that the access request was exceeded, and then it returned 503 response to the client. So NginX could successfully capture the excessive request and return proper response to the user. If you want to see what the client got, in the console, the client got 503 response, service temporarily available. This is the response that NginX returned to the client. You can customize it if you want, but I set it to default, which was the default configuration of NginX was. Hope you have learned something from this video. So you learned that you can use rate limiting to manage and control overload on your server. In the future videos, I will cover databases, which is an integral part of every web application, how to manage your database, how to use ORM, and how to separate logic of the database from the controller and the views. And also I will cover probably in the future videos about caching. It's extremely important to use caching in the application code or on the web server or on the database. There are different caching mechanisms. I will cover that. And also I would like to cover how you can have different environments. Dev environment, test environment, prod environments. These different environments help you to write and improve your productivity. And also I have plans to cover some design patterns. In this code I mentioned some design patterns. For example, in the main.py file, this is a reverse injection design pattern. So I have only one place, and I said that any apps who wants to set up its own routes, they can use this place. And the main.py file doesn't care what happens under setup.routes. routes. So for the future apps, only one place needs to be updated, and we don't need to place many other places. This is a design pattern is extremely important to use in our codes. Hope you have enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.